Welcome back, guys, to Hey Bub Outdoors. We got a great show for you today, and thanks for joining us. My good friend Darren is here from Brambleberry Farms. And Darren, thank you so much for joining us tonight. He's here to talk about grafting. And everybody, this is a skill that is so important to at least learn about, if not to learn how to practice. And Darren is an expert at grafting. He'll say no to that, but there's many people in the area that would say the same. He's just an incredible guy from Brambleberry Farms. He and his family live in southern Indiana, and he is someone I would consider a mad scientist in the world of grafting and of fruit trees and plants. And Darren, you guys are just kind of trailblazers. Thank you so much. He has a consulting portion of his business. He has workshops there at his farm. He has a nursery with all kinds of incredible plants and trees you can buy. And I think those are going on sale, maybe this week, Darren? You guys?
Yeah, they're all out. And I think this Saturday is our first day we're going to have, I think the first Saturday of April, we say we're doing open store hours on Saturdays. But I mean, people have already stopped off a little bit.
Yeah. So you can find them on Facebook at Brambleberry Farm and also www.brambleberrypermaculture.com. Darren, thanks for coming here, man.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah. Anything else you want us to know about you, buddy? Anything I left out there?
Oh, you kind of nailed it. I mean, I still feel like I see all the things that I need to learn yet. And it's hard for me to accept the title of expert because I don't think I am really expert, but I don't know. I've learned a few things and glad to share them. So that's my whole MO is if I can help people out and share what I've learned. I enjoy teaching those things. So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for sharing what you've learned with me. And I can't wait for people to make a connection with you through this and hopefully afterwards. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Matt, you want to get
Darren? Yeah, I think just to get things rolling here, let's kind of just get the cards out on the table. What is grafting? Why is it important? How can you be successful doing that? Just kind of give us a basic understanding of what that term even means, I think would be a good place to start.
Well, certainly. Well, grafting it's extremely simple what it is. All it is the process of carefully cutting two pieces of plant material and binding them together in a way that they will fuse together. Exactly like, if you cut your finger and, you wrap a Band-Aid around it and it starts healing, forms a scar, which in grafting we call callus tissue. But basically, it's operating on the principle that two tissues actually it works with skin too, on humans, but two tissues that are similar enough genetically will fuse if they're still both alive. And become one thing. And so and basically, so what grafting for trees is basically taking a stick of one type of tree, usually it's one cultivar or improved variety of a tree that we really want to reproduce, and putting that on what's called a rootstock, which is just basically something that is going to be the roots of that plant for the entire life of that tree. And so, there's all kinds of, there's just hundreds of different types of grafts and people, name their own unique ways. And we all kind of come up with our own little, twists on specific classic grafts and kind of make them work for us. But really, it's all about anything you do with grafting is lining up the cambium tissue of. So if you take a twig of any tree or shrub and you scratch the bark off of it with a knife or your fingernail, you'll see a bright green it's the really healthy alive plant looking tissue, and that's a little thin ring around the stem of a plant. And even in huge trees, that cambium is still there. You can't scratch the bark with your fingernail anymore, but if you dug in, you would find a little green ring. And that's the part that grows. So it's sort of, a little twig starts out And then each year that's the rings that kind of form as that cambium kind of growing out and getting bigger and bigger. And so with a graft, you're starting out with little stuff usually, unless you're doing a bark graft. You're starting with a little twig and you're getting those to fuse. And then if they fuse well or graft well, that little tiny twig is going to just keep getting bigger and making layers just like a regular tree. But there will always be two distinct individuals. I mean, basically a grafted tree is essentially, it's two different trees fused together that grow together for the life of the tree. I mean, there's all kinds of great metaphors. You can talk about that with marriage, and all kinds of things. The Bible has a lot of references to grafting. And that's in a nutshell basically what it is. So the why is a much larger question, and I could probably talk for 2 hours about the why. And I'll try and keep it short. And feel free to pull the shepherd's hook and pull me off stage if you need, because I tend to be a rabbit trail
You're great.
kind of guy.
No, you're great. Keep going.
But basically, the why of grafting is also fairly simple at its basic. It's basically a simple way to clone a plant as some kind of quality that we like. Most of us humans, we graft trees for better fruit or better nut. Fruit that's sweeter or bigger or more disease resistant. Maybe it has higher antioxidants. But humans also have grafted trees, and more of them are starting to do this. And I would say this is a particular interest to hunters out there and farmers. There's more and more interest starting about finding trees that have superior fodder characteristics. So not necessarily the fruit, sometimes it is, but maybe the leaves are more palatable, or maybe the fruits drop at a certain time. They're not necessarily big, but maybe they drop in the middle of the winter, and you can have persimmons that'll feed deer in the hard months of January and February. There's not much else to eat, or cattle or sheep. So there's a whole world out there, and grafting, there's no real. You don't have to graft for better fruit. You could graft because you found this tree that had a really interesting shaped leaf or an interesting color leaf. And then, ornamental nursery industry, they have all kinds of grafting that's just purely for ornamental purposes. So that's the why. Now, the interesting thing is that grafting is just one of many different ways of cloning plants. So if there's a plant like elderberry, let's just use elderberry or willow, because those are just extremely easy to root. You can just cut sticks, put them in a jar of water on your countertop, and they will grow roots within a week. And you can plant them out, and you have a clone of that plant. There'd be no reason to graft elderberry unless you were trying to get like a tree type elderberry, and using like European elderberry that might be more tree form, and then grafting American elderberry on top of that. But it seems really complicated, and some things are a lot simpler, and you don't even need to learn how to graft produce those. Blackberries will root at their tips where they touch the ground in the winter, and you can just clip those off the mother plant and move them where you want. And that is a clone of that plant that's going to be exactly the same type, unless there's some sort of mutation, which is realm. But so that's all basically cloning. Hostas, that kind of thing, you can dig up and divide. So some plants you can just sort of like cut into pieces, move them out, and you make one plant into 4 or 10 or whatever. But the really important thing I want to emphasize on this why is that, and it goes back to, I think Adam said something about diversity. The graft cloning things is great, but if we like humans kind of have gotten in the US at least 10 years ago, we're sort of stuck in this rut of you can only buy like Red Delicious, Golden Delicious, and Granny Smith apples at the store. Now we have all kinds of great new ones, thank goodness. Those things, and but they were, I guess, shiny and bright, and there's a lot of theories of why Red Delicious is not very delicious. That's a podcast, but basically there's a danger in focusing too much on cloning plants, I think. I mean, we can keep diversity by grafting a lot of different things. But it's also important, I think, to realize that seedlings, planting seeds of any given plant is an entire different process, and it is not cloning. It is creating completely new individuals that are genetically unique from their parents. So if we only graft and reproduce, we'll never get any improvement on what we have. So I have not done much of the breeding work, but this is where the realm of plant breeding comes in. And I have so many people that have been amazing mentors to me that are plant breeders, and that they focus a lot on trying to find new and better varieties by planting. One of my probably my better mentors, the grafting and things, has been Donald Compton here in Belen, Indiana. He's an older gentleman who has a humongous persimmon orchard. He planted out, I think, 1,000 or 1,500 seedling persimmons where he hand crossed two different improved male and female persimmons together, and he did a couple different crosses of these and labeled them. So he was bagging flowers, taking pollen from one, opening the bag up, putting it in, and closing it, and then
my
fruit,
goodness.
and then planted these seedlings. And now he has this orchard that's 20 or 30 years old, and there's just so many amazing persimmons that are way better than even most of the grafted ones that are common at nurseries. So a lot of the ones we sell are his varieties, and I'm trying to get his work out there because it's pretty incredible. And it's a whole nother realm. I mean, I feel like I'm a grafter. I reproduce trees and try and get them to people. I like the idea of breeding plants, but it's like a whole nother realm. And I think we just take my focus probably away from grafting. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll do that in my older years. Maybe that's what you do. You start out grafting, and then you want to start breeding plants. But it's important to kind of keep, I think, both of those ways of reproducing things going.
Yeah. Darren, can we show folks kind of how we have a video here that's about 2 minutes long, and we're going to show folks, give them a visual of a video that you posted on your Facebook page,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to share it.
Great.
We're going to go ahead and watch it. Before we start, I mean, you got your rootstock. That's what's in the pots, right? And so we'll go ahead and show a little snippet, and we'll stop and ask maybe a question or two, and then we'll watch the rest of the video. Okay? So let's go ahead and start it.
Top off of the rootstock. This is M111 apple rootstock, and there's your flats of 8. Oh, my God. So now I'm going through and shaving. For efficiency, I do 4 at a time in a row. It's a little trickier in a pot because you don't want to pull the roots that are forming off. So it's a lot easier than trying to have things of water and stuff. And so I got that going, and then I go through and I'll make my tongue cut.
Okay, so you were doing kind of an angled cut on all the rootstock coming up. First of all, what kind of graft is this, Darren, that you're doing?
Great question. And it's unfortunate you can't see. I think there's a little zoom further in, but this is a whip and tongue graft, and this is what I use for, I'd say, like 90% of what I do. It worked really well. It's simple. It has its own sort of locking mechanism built into it, and it's easy to wrap. I'd say, especially for small potted stuff, or if you're doing stuff in the ground, it's young and small diameter, this is the way to go. Though it does take, I feel like it takes a little more time behind the knife, or time behind the wheel, so to speak, to get it down. You have to get 2 different angles that are very smooth, flat, and get them to match up. And so yeah, basically I'm making an angled cut, and then I was just starting to go back and make a little tongue cut, where you're kind of splitting a little bit down to kind of open up a little wedge that 2 will sort of
Yeah.
lock into each other. And I don't know if we'll see it.
Yeah, it will. It'll zoom in right here.
Yeah.
We'll go ahead and zoom in.
Tongue cut on each one. And now I'll start shaving the same thing. These are the pieces of sign wood. This is red-free apple. So make sure they match up decently.
So this is your scion wood that you have in your hand off of the apple variety that you want. You said it was red, number 10?
Red-free. Red-free is it's a really good disease-resistant, really early ripening apple.
So you're going to put the scion wood by the rootstock stem and make sure that the face of the cut is similar, right? Or really close.
Tongue cut from the cyan, and then match them up. Try and get the cambium to line up as best you can. This one's a little bit narrow. I was running out of cyan wood, but they usually, especially apples, pretty good at grabbing that. And then just to sort of, I would normally be doing all these, but I'm going to graft this with parafilm, half-inch parafilm I do not use the rubber band like everybody else does. It's one more step, and because everything's in a greenhouse, never had any problems just using stretched, sort of tightly wrapped parafilm. And that's done there, and I'll usually top it off with a little dab of a tree wound seal.
All right.
Yeah.
So that end product there
really
with the parafilm wrapped around it, I mean, so it's ready to go. You don't need to.
Yeah.
No magic formula after that or anything.
No. And the crazy thing about it is, and some people completely disagree with me on this, but when I started, when most people start, they're so concerned about keeping everything perfectly sterile and clean. And I do have a little jar of rubbing alcohol with a dropper, and about every 10 or so grafts, I'll wipe my knife off with that. But everybody says, "Oh, you're doing plant surgery. You have to keep it, surgical clean." And I'm like, what I've seen and some of the stuff I've done, especially out in the field where you can't clean everything off that well. I mean, plants that sap has its own antibiotic properties, and I feel like those things, it's much more important to get a clean cut and match things up than it is to keep it clean. Some pawpaws I've even grafted down almost below the dirt. I've had to kind of part the dirt out to get a big enough section to graft onto, and I kind of push it out and kind of, and there's dirt in there, and I'm grafting anyway, and it's amazing. It'll just take and grow, and grafting's a lot more forgiving.
How long does it normally?
Go ahead.
How long does it normally take for the? I guess it probably depends on the species a little bit, but for the cambium layers to grab, basically.
To fuse together. It's a good question. It is very different on different species, but something like apples, if they're starting to grow out, and you see some growth on the buds, you can usually look carefully, take that tape away, and you can see a little tiny bit of, it looks like a scar, forming in easily a week or two. Some things take a lot longer, and there's some things, mulberries, I feel like grab on really fast. Pawpaws, I think, grab on really fast. Some things like dogwoods, edible dogwoods I've done seem like they take a long time. They fuse. It's like the bottom is feeding the top with sap, but they haven't completely formed a good fusion yet. And those are particularly important. Not disturb them until they really get that figured out. So,
is there a specific size of tree of pets? I mean, so obviously you're doing it on some very young trees there. Is it after it gets a certain age or a certain size, it's very, very difficult? Or is it, you can do this on mature trees as well?
That's a good question. So basically, the graft I was doing, I would say you'd be limited to anything. And once it starts getting above 3/4 of an inch diameter, I mean, you just have to be able to make that smooth. You have to have like a much beefier grafting knife, and I mean, it like wears on your wrist pretty bad. Um, that'd be the upper limit, I'd say, on that. And then you move, and then to answer your question, yes. For larger diameter trees, you can totally graft them. And like Adam was talking about, that's where we're talking about bark grafts. And they're called bark grafts because instead of trying to get, you can't get a scion that's, 3 inches in diameter. You couldn't really get that to take very well. Instead of that, we get little scions that are, 1/4 inch or whatever, and we graft them around in different spots into the bark. We kind of splice them into the bark on the larger trunk. So you just cut, a lot of times you cut off the trunk, whatever height you want to make the grafts, and then you just make there's all different kinds of bark grafts. Take little cuts into the bark where you can see that cambium, and then you shave your scion down to the same shape, make sure that cambium is lined up, and then you wrap that whole thing in I use flagging tape is great, like forestry flagging tape. It stretches, it stays on there for a little while. You can just wrap it a number of times and then tie it. Some people put little nails in there to hold them. But those grafts, what's really interesting, is a great question because the little grafts I was doing, those rootstocks were just 1 year old. And the potential for growth is very small for those in up the year after their graft. Those trees are only going to grow 1 to 2 feet probably, maybe 3 if they were really happy. But when you cut off a tree, like I often do with persimmons, you cut it off. The tree was maybe let's say 3 inches diameter. Let's say it's 10 or 12 feet tall. Cut it off with a saw, and you put some tiny little sticks on there. And if they take and grow, those things will often grow 8 feet, out of one little bud, because there's so much potential from that root that's on there that it's making up for lost time. And so it's really interesting. People kind of worry, well, my grafts didn't take, I'm going to have to order new rootstock and start over. It's like, no. Plant that rootstock and get it growing. And every year, keep trying to graft it again. And when you get it, you're not going to lose a lot of time. That root will be more established. It's going to make that top grow a lot.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So, So, Darren, if I'm right, even if you plant, say I did a bark graft with some late dropping persimmon scionwood that I collected a couple months ago, if I graft that this spring, there would be potential that it could even bear fruit this year, next year, right?
Next year.
Next year?
I've seen some. I mean, it's the way the plants grow. The persimmons, they don't flower right off of the old wood. They flower kind of off of a shoot that comes out, and it has some flowers on it. Some things like apples and pears and other things, they have, or peaches and things, have just a flower bud. And there's a flower bud and there's a vegetative bud. They're different. You can see them on the plants. So those, you almost have no chance of that new sprout flowering at all. The persimmons and some of the other ones that form flowers on the growth post bud, I have seen persimmons in particular flower, or try to, at least, as they sprout out from that graft. Because if that bud that you put on there was ready to flower with the shoots that were coming out with it, it's going to try and do that.
Yeah.
I've never really seen them set fruit. Well, the main thing, I guess, is you're grafting them at completely the wrong time, so their flowers aren't going to match up with anything.
Right.
You'd almost have to have pollen stay back and do that. But what you're saying is often it will try and bloom the next year or the year after on the side trees. So you're not,
really cool.
you're not losing time.
Speeds up the process.
Yeah, and that is another reason people graft, especially plant breeders. Universities tend to use, they will start seeds of apple crosses if they did, and it's for just one species. We're talking. And if they waited for that apple seed to start flowering, you'd be looking at a minimum of 7 years until they saw the first flowers from that. be able to see the first fruit and see what these thousands of seedlings they created are going to do. So instead, what they do is they grow them for a year, and they take scionwood and label them from each of those seedlings and number them down the row. And then they graft them onto usually a dwarf rootstock. Dwarf apple rootstocks bear fruit a lot sooner. And by grafting that little 1-year-old stem onto another rootstock, they can get it to fruit in like 2 or 3 years versus 7. Wow. And so grafting does speed up the time for flowering.
Yeah.
Waiting.
Well, Darren, we really appreciate you coming on and sharing some knowledge with us today, man.
Yeah.
Thanks for all you do. He and his wife have just an incredible place there in Southern Indiana. So check out more information. We're going to put a link in the description below, both to his Facebook page and his website. And also we're going to have a link down there to have a bark graft in there too, just so people can see that. But man, we really appreciate you, and thanks so much for being on today. It's been great just to hear from you again. So
yeah,
if you have any tree questions, guys, contact Darren. Hit up his nursery. He's got great stuff at great prices, and it's grown for kind of this area. So the rootstock works here. They're very specific in what they sell. They wouldn't sell you anything that wouldn't grow around here. So thank you so much, Darren. Appreciate your time.
Hey, thank you guys.
Yeah. Well, we'll catch you guys next week on the next episode of Hey Bub Outdoors. Thanks for joining us today.